1989 was a big year for movies. You had Batman with Michael Keaton, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Back to the Future 2, Ghostbusters 2, Lethal Weapon 2. You had The Little Mermaid, Look Who's Talking, Honey I Shrunk the Kids, Driving Miss Daisy. You had Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, The Karate Kid 3, Roadhouse, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Kickboxer, Field of Dreams, Pet Sematary, Weekend at Bernie's, James Bond in License to Kill, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, Casualties of War, Born on the 4th of July. I could just keep going. What a year. But there was one film that came out in a very limited release, without any publicity, that flopped in the theater because of that, but became a cult hit on home video. And that movie was called Best of the Best. It came out in November, but I didn't see it until the following year. In 1990, when I was 16 years old, I was over at my friend Brian Denton's house. And I was spending the night, and we were eating bowls of Skittles and looking for stuff to watch on TV. And he said, "Hey, it's Best of the Best." And I said, "What's that?" And he goes, "Oh, you haven't seen Best of the Best?" Like, "No, what's that?" "Oh, man, we gotta watch this." So it was probably HBO, one of the movie channels, but I sat down and watched this film. Oh my God, this thing became an instant classic for me, and I was obsessed. My love for it just continued to grow and grow ever since. Now, I, of course, was a big fan of ninja movies and Bruce Lee going back to the early 1980s. The Karate Kid films were in my top 10 films, so I was kind of designed to like this kind of thing, but this movie was special. The following year, in 1991, is when I joined the National Karate School, and the next year, 1992, when I turned 18, I switched over to Jeff Santella's Street Defense Systems Institute. By March of 1993, I was right there at the movie theater to see Best of the Best 2. Now, it's rare when a sequel is better than the first film, especially when the first film is one of the greatest films of all time. But in my opinion, Best of the Best 2 is even better. It's got to be in my top 5 films of any genre of all time. By the end of that month, Bruce Lee's son, Brandon Lee, died. The following month, I turned 19 years old, and the month after that, I was back at the theater to see Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. Shortly thereafter, I had to stop taking martial arts classes for one reason or another, and from time to time, every decade or so, I return to the dojo and get a few more belts. I am currently at a green belt status of Shito-Ryu Karate, where I've been stationary at for the last 4 years. But I plan to return to the dojo again soon to complete my quest of getting the black belt. But back to the story. Best of the Best and Best of the Best 2. Now, these are films that star the Rhee brothers, Phillip and Simon, and Eric Roberts. Back in 1966, 9-year-old Simon Rhee and his 6-year-old brother Phillip started taking Taekwondo classes 6 days a week in Korea, and eventually earned their black belts. In 1969, they moved to California and joined the Juncheong School. This was the largest martial arts school in Los Angeles, with 700 students, including many celebrities. Juncheong was 25 years old at the time. He had started learning martial arts at 8 years old, and it was from him that they also learned Hapkido in addition to Taekwondo. And the Rhee brothers also started competing every weekend throughout the 1970s and through the mid-1980s. It was at a 1975 competition in Korea where Simon was inspired by the actions of his competitors. And he would tell his brother Phillip about this, who would hold on to those ideas for many years and use them in creating the character traits and story elements of the film Best of the Best. In November of that year, their martial arts instructor Jun Chong was making a South Korean film called Visitor in America in Los Angeles, and he put both of the Rhee brothers into one of the fight scenes. The following year, in 1976, Visitor in America was theatrically released in the United States as Bruce Lee Fights Back from the Grave, starring a 32-year-old Jun Chong who actually has a fight scene with a sword-wielding, uncredited Sho Kosugi, who would later star in the Enter the Ninja films and the Lee Van Cleef television series The Master. And in the car junkyard fight scene, you can see 18-year-old Simon Rhee and 15-year-old Phillip Rhee in their film debuts. When they saw themselves on the big screen, this was the first time they actually got to see what they looked like performing martial arts. And they were bit by the movie bug. They wanted to be up on the big screen from then on. Now that same year, Simon Rhee's best friend James Liu, who was 24 years old at the time, appeared in his first film as well. The next year in 1977, Simon and Phillip would appear again in the Kentucky Fried Movie, and June Chong made the cover of Black Belt magazine. In 1979, June Chong and Simon Rhee were on the cover of Black Belt magazine. And in 1980, Simon and Phillip got to work on the Chuck Norris film, The Octagon. But it was also that year that Phillip competed in Korea and also got to see things happen that would later on inspire more character traits and story elements in the film Best of the Best. In 1981, Simon and Phillip would get their first starring roles in the movie Furious. It never had a theatrical release. It came out on VHS tape in 1984, but quickly became very rare and very expensive if you could even find a copy. But it was eventually released on DVD in 2024, and this year, in 2025, it was released on Blu-ray. This is the craziest movie ever created. If you get a chance to watch it, please check it out. You will not believe the insanity. And then you'll probably kill me for asking you to watch it. Phillip plays an elderly master in gray wig, and Simon plays the hero of the story who has to battle Phillip's henchmen, like the magician who fires chickens out of his hands, and the Scandinavian Mongolian warriors of the mountainside, and the flaming skeletons, and the dragon in the nether realm of the astral plane. I'm not making any of this up. In a little side note, Susanna Hoffs, in the same year she founded the band The Bangles, plays a waitress, where she is credited as Bambi Carter. Then in 1983, Simon and Phillip were in the film Firefight. But this movie would not be released until 2023 when it made its debut on the Viking Samurai YouTube channel. This short film starred Frank Dukes and was directed by Sheldon Lettich. Sheldon Lettich later went on to direct Bloodsport, which was written by Frank Dukes based on his fake life story. Frank Dukes also had a martial arts school in Los Angeles at the time. And then in 1985, June Chong created his own movie production company and made the film Ninja Turf, which is also known as LA Street Fighters. It wasn't released until 1986, and it starred a 41-year-old June Chong, a 33-year-old James Liu, and a 25-year-old Phillip Rhee, all playing high school kids. And it also features Superfoot Bill Wallace. Not only that, 1985 was the year that Simon and Phillip made the cover of Black Belt magazine together. And then the next year, in 1986, June and Phillip co-produced a film called Silent Assassins, starring Sam Jones, Flash Gordon, and Linda Blair from The Exorcist. This movie wouldn't be released until 1988, but it got the interest of The Movie Group, who wanted to buy the film, but Phillip informed them the movie's already owned and already produced and already distributed, but I can give you my next film. And that film was Best of the Best. 1989's Best of the Best, starring a 32-year-old Simon Rhee as Dae Han and a 29-year-old Phillip Rhee as Tommy Lee. Phillip was the actor and writer of the film. It also starred 33-year-old Eric Roberts and 37-year-old James Liu as Se-Jing Kwan. This movie was about the American national karate team traveling to Korea to battle their team. The coach was none other than James Earl Jones, Darth Vader himself, who, believe it or not, even though I saw Star Wars in the theater in 1977, I did not know James Earl Jones was the voice. I'd never heard of James Earl Jones. I only knew him as Coach Kuzo from Best of the Best. And the American team was made up of Eric Roberts playing Alexander Grady, Phillip Rhee playing Tommy Lee, Sean Penn's brother Chris Penn as Travis Brickley, John Dye as Virgil Keller, and David Agresta as Sonny Grasso. Now, Chris Penn died at the age of 40, John Dye died at the age of 47, and David Agresta was never in a film before or after and died at the age of 60. On the Korean team, you had Simon Rhee as Dae Han, James Liu as Se-Jing Kwan, Ken Nagayama as Young Kim, who had also been in Ninja Turf, aka LA Street Fighters. And you had Ho Sik Pak as Han Cho, a martial artist and stuntman who had been in Big Trouble in Little China and Mortal Kombat. You also had Kane Hodder, Jason Voorhees himself, playing the memorable character Bert at that country and western bar. He would return in Best of the Best 2 as the security guard at the back door that Eric Roberts puts a pen through his hand, nails it to the back door, and again as a neo-Nazi gunman in Best of the Best 3. But speaking of the continuing Best of the Best film franchise comes 1993's release, Best of the Best 2. Simon was 36, Phillip was 33, and Eric was 37. And not only does Chris Penn return as Travis Brickley, but Eden Gross returns as Alexander Grady's son. That's Eric Roberts' character's son. You also had Ken Nagayama returning as his character Young Kim, but in the credits they changed his name to Young Jun. Don't know why. And you also had the return of the character Sejing Kwan, but he was not played by James Liu this time. Now he was played by Hayward Nishioka. I believe that James was probably working on another project at the time and was not available. This movie was about the martial arts underworld where competitors of all different styles fought in the underground Coliseum in Las Vegas, hosted by Wayne Newton, where they would all fight in a no-rules competition in an attempt to work their way up to eventually battle the owner of the Coliseum, Brachus. And if they could earn that fight, they also earned the right to live or die. The audience would decide whether it's thumbs up or thumbs down. Would Brachus kill his opponent, or would they kill him and become the new owner of the Coliseum? Chris Penn's character, Travis Brickley, fights in the Coliseum and is killed. This begins the events of the film. And you get to see Alexander Grady and Tommy Lee, who have now opened their own martial arts school together, go on a mission of training and justice to take down Brachus and the Coliseum, to stop anyone else from suffering the fate of their friend Travis. Will they live or will they die? One of the gladiators, Stavros, who won the gold in Greco-Roman wrestling, was played by Stefanos Miltsakakis, who had been in 5 Jean-Claude Van Damme films and played characters named Stavros in 2 other movies, and he died at the age of 59. This movie, featuring fighters of all different styles in a tournament-style competition with no rules, debuted 8 months before the Ultimate Fighting Championships. In fact, the UFC and the arcade game Mortal Kombat 2 both came out on the same day. I became obsessed with this film. I remember seeing in the TV Guide that it was going to air on TV for the first time on a channel that I didn't have. The channel was scrambled, and I could watch the screen full of static and flipping and orange, but I could hear it, and I could kind of see silhouettes of the scenes that I had in my memory. The problem was it was going to air at 3 a.m. and run until it was time to get up to go to work. Did I go to bed early? No, I was an idiot. I stayed up all night. I watched the movie, scrambled, and I went into work dead on my feet. But I got to see Best of the Best 2 again. Fortunately, I would be able to get it on videotape a few years later, as well as Best of the Best 1, and I would start to try and track down all the previous films that Phillip Rhee had been in. And that's where I learned about out-of-print tapes and the ridiculously high price that they were charging to get videotapes in the 90s of movies that weren't popular and weren't on the shelves. I remember the one store that could actually order me a copy of Silent Assassins wanted $80 of mid-1990s money for a videotape. In 1995, Best of the Best 3 was a direct-to-video release. This movie starred Phillip Rhee again, but it was now directed by him as well. Unfortunately, it was not an instant classic, but it was followed in 1998 by Best of the Best 4. This time, Phillip starred, directed, and wrote the movie, but again, it was direct-to-video and, in my opinion, not an instant classic. And that was it. Radio silence from then on, until 2015, with the release of Underdog Kids, starring Phillip Rhee, who was not only the actor, he was the director and the writer, and his son Sean Rhee was in the film as well. This movie is full of every single cliche that you could ever put in a film. It's actually mind-boggling how many cliches are in it. I'm not going to tear the movie down, even though I was so excited for it for so long when it was in production and so let down when I finally watched it. But now that I watched it again 10 years later, I realize, you know what, this is a real movie. It is made of quality. It's not a piece of junk. These are only movie cliches to someone like me who has been around for more than half a century and seen my fair share of films, but for a new generation, it's all new. They're not cliche yet. You also get cameos by the nunchuck-wielding Mongol from Best of the Best 2, one of the gladiators in the Colosseum, and their old Taekwondo and Hapkido master Jun Chong, as well as Master Dan Inosanto, Bruce Lee's best friend, and Benny the Jet Urquidez, Don the Dragon Wilson, and Richard Norton. You also have characters played by Max Gale from Barney Miller and Whiz Kids, Tom Arnold of all people, and Ted McGinley. But that was it. That was their last hurrah. Now, Eric Roberts has been in almost 900 films and shows at this point. Simon Rhee has done stunts and stunt coordinating in almost 300 films and shows and has worked with everyone from Arnold Schwarzenegger to Tom Cruise to Van Damme to The Rock, and he even doubled Jackie Chan and Donnie Yen as their stunt doubles. James Liu has done stunt work and stunt coordinating work in over 300 films and shows, and has been in everything from Big Trouble in Little China to Avengers Endgame. But in my mind, all these decades, I was kind of obsessed with Best of the Best star, Phillip Rhee. Even to the point where in the mid-90s, I had a friend named Nelson Gensoli who I worked with at the bowling alley and later at Home Depot, who was from the Philippines and knew some martial arts. And in my mind, I thought of us becoming best of friends, like Alex Grady and Tommy Lee in Best of the Best 2. And we were going to adventure around and battle the forces of evil with our fists and feet. I have been listening to the soundtracks of the first two Best of the Best films maybe 50 times a year for over 30 years at this point. And you're not going to believe what finally happened. They had, here in 2025, a Best of the Best reunion. 65-year-old Phillip Rhee, 68-year-old Simon Rhee, 69-year-old Eric Roberts, and 73-year-old James Liu all convened in Las Vegas, the place where the Coliseum was in Best of the Best 2. And 51-year-old me joined them for 4 hours of martial arts training, photographs, signings, questions, answers, and fun. When I walked up to the dojo, Phillip Rhee opened the door and welcomed me in. My entire body was covered in goosebumps. I sat down in a chair, out of my mind with excitement, and Phillip walked in and sat down next to me and just started talking to me like we're old friends. We sat and talked for 30 minutes. My dream had come true. I was the best friend of Phillip Rhee. Over the course of the next few hours, I got to have Daehan himself punching at my face, Se-Jin Kwan kicking me, Tommy Lee high-fiving me like I was Travis Brickley, Eric Roberts fist-bumping me, and we all fought and trained and talked. It's the greatest thing ever in the history of the universe. At the end, all 4 of them sat directly in front of me, Indian style, on the dojo mat, and gave us words of wisdom before we left. You know, the last trip I ever took was to Hong Kong, which was a martial arts related trip where I walked in the footsteps of Bruce Lee and trained in his martial arts style. And now this trip was again martial arts related, off to Las Vegas to do martial arts with the stars of Best of the Best. I am definitely going to be rejoining my dojo in January, where I'm already scheduled for 10 classes that month. And if I get my black belt by the age of 52, it will be 35 years in the making. That's got to be some kind of record. Now, before I go, I want to just give you one little goofy little bit of info. Through the 90s and early 2000s, I used to just sometimes, milling around the house, would make a trumpet sound with my mouth going... Well, one time I was watching Best of the Best with my girlfriend several decades ago, and a scene came on where Eric Roberts and Phillip Rhee's character get their room together after they've been accepted on the national karate team. And as they're putting their stuff away, Eric starts going, he starts making that sound. And my girlfriend turned to me and said, "Is that where you got that from?" Well, over this past weekend, when I was there with all of them, as soon as Eric Roberts sat down in a chair in front of me, he went, with his mouth. Oh, I could not believe it. He did it in front of me, in person. Well, I can't say this event was a dream come true because I never dreamed it was a possibility, but it turned out it was, and it happened, and I was there. And that's my story. Until next time.